Hey guys, this is Mark with NCEngravers, and today we are going to be talking about the 1911 Optic Cut Service that has been added to the lineup on the webpage. I want to briefly talk about what's offered, what the configuration is, what to expect. Really want to point you in the right direction because there's so many different manufacturers out on the market when it comes to the 1911 slides. Everything from Ruger to Colt to Kimber to Wilson Combat to SDI to Taurus to Rock Island. And what we find is that they're not all made 100% the same. So generally speaking, I'm going to explain this the best I can. Hopefully this will point you in the right direction to know whether or not an optic cut can be done on your model slide. So let's kind of just jump right into that. Let's first talk about if it's supported on your slide. Then we're going to go into optic models and the explanation of that a little bit more. And then we're going to move on to what is actually needed if you were to send your stuff in. So what do you got to send in order to get this work done? First and foremost, the idea is that the Optic Cut service that we offer currently, and this will be updated on the webpage, so pay attention to the writing in the listing, but as of right now, the optic cuts that we offer are only done on a Series 70 slide. Now, if you're like, hey, I've got a 1911, I really don't know what you're talking about, what you want to do is take your gun, if it's still on here, and slide this to the rear, and that kind of exposes this back section here, right? Flip your gun over and see if there is a plunger right in here. If there is a plunger, that's called a Series 80. What that means is when you remove the rear iron sight, that plunger would basically fall out or would come out through the top. If you flipped it over, that would end up falling out. So we do not offer an optic cut on the Series 80 at this time. Once again, I'm generally speaking because there's so many different versions and variances of the 1911. But generally speaking, if you have a plunger, it's not offered currently. So that leads us to you have a Series 70 and you're interested in having it done. Right now, we only offer the optic cuts on a full size. That means a 5-inch. So any of the EMPs, the smaller carry guns, the Commanders, the 4 1/4s, the 4s, we do not offer it on them. And this is mostly because the distance between where the barrel locks up and the rear of the slide is a little bit different from manufacturer to manufacturer. So I'm not saying that it can't be done. You may want to reach out to us, but what I am saying is that generally speaking, it's not going to be offered because there's so many different versions of those micro slides that it may just not fit the slide or it may be an issue with the extractor. So you'll want to reach out to us if that is something that you have and you're very curious about whether or not it can be done. But generally speaking, it's not offered unless you have a 5-inch slide. Let's talk about the screws that we use, and then we're going to move on to the optics and some of those other things. So when you buy an optic like a Holosun or a Romeo Zero, it comes with a couple different packs of screws. And they make a screw that's called an M3, which is the small skinny one, and they make one called an M4, which is the fat screw. Now, we cut for the M4. It has a little bit more holding power. It's a little bit thicker screw, and most importantly, it's not as long because there is an extractor. On most guns, 1911 models, there's an extractor that runs from the rear up to the front. You can see that it pokes out right here. It's black. The idea is that if we use one of the other screws that comes with these optics, we would potentially need to cut that screw down because when the optic is cut into the slide, the socket, it's cut all the way down to remove the dovetail, and then that screw would actually be hitting the extractor if we were to use a skinnier screw. So we use the M4 screw. We are going to require the optic and the screw at the time of work. This gives us the opportunity to fit the optic to the slide, to make sure it's aligned correctly, to make sure it's installed correctly, and we don't have any issues with the extractor or the screw. So we're making sure that we do all that for you upon the service, so you're not doing any of that. Let's jump into what optics are supported. So no doubt the biggest one is going to be the Holosun 407 507K. We also see the Romeo Zero takes the same footprint. The Swamp Fox Sentinel takes the same cutout as well. Couple of things to think about here is that this video is probably going to be out for a little bit of time, and more than likely we're going to start to see new makes and models hit the market of optics that do fit this socket, okay? So the idea here is do a little bit of research, find out if your optic model, even though it's not listed on our service listing, make sure that it does fit the socket, okay? Because if it's too long, it won't work. If the screw pattern is wider than this, it'll be sticking out through the sides of the slide. So there's a lot of reasons why we do this exact optic cut footprint. It's also very common for stuff like the Glock G43X, the Hellcat OSP. There's several different ones. Shield makes an optic ready gun that's out there now. They all happen to take that same optic that's out on the market, so we've obviously chose that as well. So let's talk about that a little bit. So when you add an optic to the slide, the rear factory iron sight is removed. We cut a radius front, a radius back. We do not cut for the pegs. Let me explain that a little bit better to you. The idea is that on a lot of guns that are out on the market, they have 4 pegs, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we offer a service to remove the rear 2 pegs because the optic doesn't have any holes for the rear 2 pegs. So you're going to find this with a lot of different optics that are on the market. They really only have recessed pockets for the front 2, so it doesn't work. So we don't do that. We cut for a tight radius front and a tight radius back, which actually will give you more holding than what you're going to get with those pegs. The idea is that it's a really tight fit. You're not going to have to press it in. You're not going to have to force it in or anything like that. You're going to get a nice fit like this. It's going to not hang over the sides too far. Okay, it aligns with the screw holes just like it's supposed to. So everything works accordingly. The idea, and once again, generally, lightly speaking, there's a lot of different makes and manufacturers of iron sights that come on these slides. The rear iron sight of the 407, 507K, and Romeo Zero should align fairly close with the front factory sight. Now, once again, you know, eggshell walking on that comment is that there's a lot of different manufacturers of front sights out there. So just because you've got one and you get it back and it doesn't work, you know, don't feel discouraged. You probably need to replace the front sight. It does work with probably 90 to 95% of what's out there, but there may be a handful of them that it just doesn't work with because it's an unpredictable market with what was installed in the gun, whether you installed it, somebody installed it before you got it, the manufacturer went with a different iron sight when they shipped it. So there's a lot of different versions out there. But guys, this is generally what it would kind of look like, okay? The optic is required and the screws during the install process. So once again, so we're able to do all of that for you. I know one of the questions that you're thinking right now is, what's the turnaround time on something like this? How long does it actually take to get this back? The idea for us is it's about a 2 to 3 day turnaround time in order to get this back. So once it arrives, assuming we have everything in hand that we need to do the work, between 2 and 3 business days, it's going to ship back out. It's going to ask you what color do you want your slide during checkout. It's going to ask you what model optic are we putting on the gun during checkout. So these are all the little things that it's going to, you know, kind of red flag of, hey, there's a color I'm looking for, it's not there, or hey, I've got a different optic that's not in the lineup. These are all things that should hopefully allow you to ask those correct questions before you place your order, and then we can make sure that we are, you know, everything's in order for when it arrives. If we need to order a color, it's here. If you've got a different optic that's not on the web page, maybe I can give you an answer and say, hey, I've got one here. Let me give it a go on somebody else's slide. Let me see if that works before you process your order or before you ship it in.